What's up gamers, it's Monster Hunter Iceberg time once again. We've hit 2 tiers so far, covering about 100 fun Monster Hunter facts, and in today's video we approach the bottom of the iceberg itself before we disappear into the murky depths of the weird and wonderful. We're still in somewhat well-known territory right now though, so let's have some fun with it. 2 tiers down, 6 to go, so let's get stuck into tier 3 of the ultimate Monster Hunter Iceberg. White Fatalis' true name. So Fatalis, it's a monster that needs no introduction. As old as the series itself and widely considered to be one of the most powerful and difficult monsters, this guy means business whenever he shows up. And just about everyone, new and old, is familiar with it due to its appearance in Iceborne. But did you know that it has 2 additional forms in the main series as well? Forms that have shown up several times since they were introduced. The first is the Crimson Fatalis, which as the name suggests is partly red, has an enhanced control over its fire attacks, and of course the defining feature, an overgrown gnarled horn on the left side of its head. The second variation, introduced in Monster Hunter DOS, and far more important to this point, is the White Fatalis. A Fatalis with brilliant white scales, a bushy beard and mane, control over powerful dragon elemental lightning, and one of the sweetest battle themes in the series. Neither of these forms are explicitly labeled as subspecies, but rather just elder dragons all their own, and when venturing out on quests to hunt them, they tend to simply be called Fatalis, leaving the player to figure out which it may be by the locale and the quest description. It's very flavorful and implies that Fatalis is all of these forms, and differentiating is of little use because they are all cataclysmically destructive no matter which form they take. White Fatalis is clearly called that due to its coloration, but more recently it has specifically been called Old Fatalis instead. This matches with its visuals having a big bushy beard and only serves to enhance its aura of godlike power. Furthermore, and more accurate to the iceberg, is the name Ancestral Dragon Fatalis. This is the name of its battle theme, and I believe it's a more accurate translation of its name and title in Japanese. It even implies that all things, great and small, ultimately lead back to Fatalis. Dark areas in Monster Hunter Tri. This point came up briefly in the last video when I spoke about the torch as an item and tool in-game in the 3rd generation. In Monster Hunter Tri specifically, when this feature was introduced, certain maps had specific areas that were nearly entirely pitch black, which as you can imagine made them pretty hard to navigate, and that is where the torch came in to light your path. These areas included Area 4 of the deserted island, Areas 4 and 5 in the Tundra map, and I think Area 6 of the Sandy Plains. Don't quote me on that last one. These areas were few and far between, and were usually occupied by Neopterons or Gigis, maybe the odd Melinks, and certainly made for a fresh change to the way you approach exploration, and if nothing else were pretty immersive. You will not find them reappearing beyond Tri though, as subsequent games brighten the areas up significantly, which is a bit of a shame. Gajau was introduced in Tri. Gajau first appeared under that name in Monster Hunter World as their own small monster, a big old fish found mainly in the muddy areas of the Wildspire Waste. Before that appearance though, they actually debuted in Monster Hunter Tri alongside underwater combat. Back then it was known simply as the catfish, was native to the flooded forest underwater areas, and was just classified as a fish alongside about half a dozen different aquatic monsters that were largely reminiscent of real-world animals. Dealing with these monsters was a matter of weakening them before using a fishing harpoon to finish them off so that you could carve them, otherwise they would just flee. The fish classification back then covered the catfish, the shark, spelled with a Q because fantasy setting I guess, the tuna, the arowana, the mollids, and the jellyfish. Gajau, as it appeared in Generation 5, was initially classified as a Piscean wyvern funnily enough, before being changed back to just fish as of a patch shortly after World's release, suggesting that this was a mistake. As of Monster Hunter Wilds, Gajau has been moved back into the waterways and appears as a whopper, the large fish that require you to play a little minigame to catch. Music samples from sound libraries. So I think you'll find that in a lot of video games, a lot of the sounds and music come from sample libraries, and aren't necessarily custom made, though that's not always the case. There's plenty that are entirely custom made. With regards to Monster Hunter, I had not once ever heard of this, but did some searching and ultimately came across a forum thread talking about samples being used across several games, one of which was Monster Hunter DOS. The more knowledgeable folks from that site suggested that it's from some set called Aka, or Masai by Sonokinetic, which means absolutely nothing to me, but there you go. The more you know. Multiple ancient civilizations. The ancient civilization just got a whole lot more context thanks to the story in Monster Hunter Wilds, and we got a taste of the structures and concepts that made up that core society of Wyveria some 1,000 years ago. We've known that the world we experience when playing Monster Hunter games is one with a deep history, even if we aren't explicitly told that history very often. We know that we are not the first people to be there, and we will likely not be the last. The best evidence for this is of course the ruins one will find when exploring the maps in-game. Ever since the series began, we can find remnants of of civilizations long past, but surely they can't all just be Wyveria, right? Monster Hunter has presented to us as players many different locales over its 20-odd year life, different hunting grounds to take on a plethora of monsters within them, as well as a wide range of different villages and towns, each presenting their own culture. Throughout these locales are countless examples of ruined architecture, from Castle Shrade itself, to the submerged structures in the deserted island and the underwater ruin, to the tower stretching beyond the clouds, to the colossal red sculptures throughout the ancestral steppe. They're just everywhere, and they're all very different. Different iconography, different materials, different types of buildings. No two locales are quite the same. And so it stands to reason that whilst Wyveria was a major civilization in the past, it wasn't the only one, and throughout the vast history of this world, the land has seen the rise and fall of many major and minor societies, all carving out their own little slice of paradise. Quests are only done once, and quest canonicity. I've combined these 2 points because they are largely looking at the same thing. There's not a whole lot to say though. I feel like this concept has already popped up a few times in this video series alone. This concept essentially draws back on the necessary dissonance that exists within the Monster Hunter games, where if you consider what your hunter's role is supposed to be from a canon lore perspective, they are supposedly a keeper of the peace and restorer of balance in the natural world, and yet we can fight most monsters a countless amount of times to make armor and weapons and have a grand old time. This for one doesn't make any sense when you read most quest descriptions, as they're focused on a specific individual or group of monsters interfering or endangering someone or something. And secondly, it's almost assuredly an unsustainable practice to slay, 100 Rathalos in the same locale without completely collapsing that ecosystem and making Wraths extinct. The simplest fix for this is of course the idea that the quests you complete as the player are only ever done once in the canon of the game, meaning any redo of that quest can be considered non-canon and a necessity of the gameplay loop. If you do need a headcanon for it though, what I like to think is that any repeats are kind of an alternate way that quest may have played out in another universe. Alternatively, you may also consider that only the key quests are canon throughout your playthrough, or in World and Wild's case, just the assigned quests. Your call. Tonfas. The Tonfas are the first of 3 obscure weapons we will talk about in this video, and so far are exclusive to Monster Hunter Frontier. Their name in Japanese translates loosely to Piercing Dragon Stick, which goes pretty hard, and they first appeared in Monster Hunter G Genuine as a brand new weapon type. Tonfas are best described as fast-moving impact weapons where the hunter would wield a gauntlet in either hand that housed a sort of piston-like mechanism, which in turn allowed for heightened mobility thanks to their ability to throw you into the air. They had several unique mechanics, including a gauge similar to the longsword and bonuses to repeated attacks on the same monster part in combat. The most interesting feature though, in my opinion, was the 2 different modes you could switch between, short mode and long mode. Long mode seemed to have the standard, slower, heavier hits with normal impact hit zones, whereas short mode attacks were faster and inverted the impact hit zone of the monster you were fighting, meaning that the monster part that was most resistant to impact is now the weakest to it, and vice versa. Whilst they would likely obliterate any semblance of balance due to the power creep of Frontier, I would love to see some iteration of the Tonfas in the mainline series one day. Gauntlet weapons are just cool, and having a more fast-paced impact weapon is a cool idea as well. Magnet Spike. Moving on to obscure weapon number 2, we then have the Magnet Spike. Another Frontier exclusive weapon much like the Tonfas, the Magnet Spike had a much shorter shelf life as it was introduced in Frontier Z Zenith, which honestly there's so many Frontier expansions I don't really know what order they go in, but I do know that Zenith stuff was near the end. As such, the Magnet Spike is one of the shortest lived weapons in the series. The premise behind this weapon seems to be sort of an all-in-one approach. It's fast, it's slow, slashing damage and impact damage, just the whole package. That's my takeaway at least, having never used it. Feel free to correct me in the comments down below. All that said, the primary feature seems to be the magnetism aspect, hence the name of the weapon. Players could fire a small magnetic marker that would stick onto a part of the monster, and this marker would allow the hunter to dash towards and away from that part, with quite a bit of range and speed by inverting the magnetic field. The weapon also had a degree of form changing, which allowed for that switch between slashing and impact damage I mentioned earlier. Seems completely game breaking in any context other than Frontier, so I doubt we will see the Magnet Spike again, but who knows. Axel Axe. Well, we might as well get them all in here, and so the third and final obscure weapon for this video is the Axel Axe. There's less info out there for this one due to it being an exclusive weapon for Monster Hunter Explore, the mobile game that has since been shut down but was only accessible in Canada and Japan, making it probably the most enigmatic weapon in the series. Put simply, This was a rocket-propelled axe. Said rocket power allowed the hunter to perform a range of jumping and fast-paced movements and attacks designed to flow with the equally fast-paced nature of Monster Hunter Explore. The handle of the axe had a throttle that the hunter could turn, like a goddamn motorcycle or something, to execute those attacks, allowing for that fast movement despite the design being heavy and bulky. The weapon was made for powerful hits, and as it heats up you can execute a strong finishing move called a burst slash. This is conceptually a very cool weapon, though much like the magnet spike, I would be surprised if we do ever see it again in the future. Don't trust the wiki. No matter which fandom you visit or find yourself a part of on the internet, you will always see that misinformation runs rampant online. Wikis are particularly prone and vulnerable to this misinformation because they are inherently community run and maintained, meaning that the information that is kept on them can quickly become outdated or just be plain incorrect despite the best intentions of the users, because there's no power in place to scrutinize edits beyond admins. The Monster Hunter wiki, that is the main one, the fandom one, is a particularly large wiki, having something close to 37,000 pages on it, and as such is a huge project to try and maintain, and has contained its fair share of untrustworthy information over the years. I myself did edit the wiki to fix mistakes when I saw them well over a decade ago, and I do remember back then that there was some form of drama arising, though the details have since completely left my brain. I think there was some big blowout between some admins, which resulted in a sort of fracturing of that community, and some folks left to make their own sites. Personally, I think the wiki has some merit and can be a valuable tool, but it's far from perfect. Just take whatever you may read on it with a grain of salt, I would say. All of that said, the level of unreliable and mixed information has prompted some parts of the community to splinter off and essentially start again, making a brand new Monster Hunter wiki from scratch, cutting out the fluff and unnecessary information, and only including stuff that has hard and fast sources. This new project is still in its early days as of right now, but so far, it's looking pretty good. I really like it and use it as much as I can. Khezu is cute? So the Khezu. You all know him by now. He was in Monster Hunter Rise with some fancy new attacks and has been around since the very first Monster Hunter game. It's a very unique monster design, and that design appears intentionally disgusting to most Western players because, well, it's a gigantic, pale leech dragon with stretchy, flabby skin. And yet, Khezu consistently comes out on top in monster popularity polls in Japan. Japan just loves this guy, thinks it's adorable. Looking into why this might be, I think we're looking at a pretty good example of the concept of Kimo Kawaii. You'll find that in Japanese pop culture, there's a trend of characters that are just kind of gross and off-putting being considered cute, and that's what Kimo Kawaii is referring to. Weird but cute, or something that is so ugly that it kind of loops back around to being appealing, or that the cuteness is a result of just how ugly it is. This is a sentiment that is not just seen in the fandom, but is also present in the canon universe of Monster Hunter as well. There's a quest in Monster Hunter Rise called Bzz or Zzz, like onomatopoeia for getting electrocuted or falling asleep, where the description of that quest reads, my boyfriend is straight trippin'. He thinks that Somnicanth are cuter than Khezu. Hello? Obviously Khezu are, but he won't budge. Well, if you won't see it my way, then I guess we'll let you settle this. So there it is. Next time you think it's weird that Khezu gets called cute, that's why. Monsters are bred for the arena. So the arenas in Monster Hunter, if you really want to think about it, are a little bit messed up. If hunters are intended to be there to maintain the balance of nature in this world, why in the world would they need to fight monsters in a man-made arena-style setting? Is it entertainment? Is it for research? I don't know, but the point of contention is how exactly the monsters get there. Now in World, it was implied and actually outright stated by the Second Fleet Master that captured monsters were used in the arena for training, and you could find them in both Astera and Celiana on platforms by the research center after you caught them. And the first capture of each monster also unlocked their special arena quest. And now in Wilds, the monsters are implied to make their own way into the arena of their own accord and can come and go as they please. But prior to this, who knows? Were they bred and raised to fight in these pits like some gladiator shit? It's kind of unanswered as far as I know, and it's probably best to just not think about it too much. Jeff. This is a pretty brief one, but is another example of a generic human name being designated to a monster by the fanbase. We've had something similar multiple times before. People often call the Devil Joe just Joe, and Sergio's Steve. Jeff refers to Safi Jiva in this case, a name given to it when we just had a picture of it, but no official name yet. Why Jeff was chosen? I don't know. Probably the meme if I had to guess. Seasons. So seasons now obviously have a bit of a different connotation than when this Iceberg was made. In the modern iteration of Monster Hunter, that is Monster Hunter Wilds, we now have the seasons of the Fallow, Inclemency, and the Plenty. These follow a cycle of death and decay into an intense environmental turmoil, which then gives way to a period of plentiful resources before being plunged back into that cycle of decay once more. Each map in Wilds has a different inclemency, ranging from brutal sandstorms to torrential rains to volcanic eruptions, but seasons as they were likely intended in this Iceberg would probably be referring to their iteration in Monster Hunter DOS. DOS was the second core Monster Hunter game, and as such the beginning of the second generation. It was, however, only released in Japan, and as such tends to be a game that not many folks have played. Many features we know now were first introduced in this game, some stuck and some didn't, but one of the most interesting features were the seasons. Now, I've not played DOS myself, but according to the new Monster Hunter wiki, Monster Hunter 2 features a seasonal cycle where the world shifted between the breeding period, the cold period, and the warm period. The seasons progressed in real time, and in online mode that was set by the server, meaning that it was the same season for all players. The season changed every 25 hours in the online mode. Seems pretty cool, to be honest, as I understand that the seasons would impact the maps, the monsters that could appear, and the quests that you could undertake. It's a shame this feature didn't persist, though it is cool to have something similar return now in Wilds. It's a feature that I feel could have had major implications to the series as a whole had it been included as a core mechanic moving forward, and even makes me wonder where the series may have arrived at if that had been the case. Third generation monsters are replacements. Monster Hunter Tri first released back in 2009 and brought with it a whole new roster of monsters. This roster was so new in fact that if someone were to read into it too much, they might theorize that the roster was full of monsters that shared similar traits to existing ones, and those older monsters were nowhere to be found, as the only returning large monsters we had were Rathalos, Rathian, and Diablos. And so arises the idea that the third generation monsters were designed as replacements for the existing ones, filling similar niches and roles. Evidence of this usually points towards specific examples, so I'll rattle off a few here. We don't see the likes of the raptor bird wyverns like Velociprey, with the Jaggy, Baggy, and eventually Roggy filling the same niche. Kirapeko fills the same role as Kutku, and both are large, goofy-looking bird-like monsters who both utilize fire. Banahabra are just Vespoid with different models. Renoplos are a fresher, more interesting take on an aggro, charging herbivore, but fundamentally are very similar to Bullfango. Giganox is conceptually very similar to Kezu, and there are exactly 3 older dragons just like in Monster Hunter 1, with one of them being a black dragon. I suppose all of this could point to the dev team sort of taking a second try at the original formula, but ultimately I think it's probably a bit bogus to think that the roster is intended to replace the previous one, especially considered that a lot of the older monsters end up showing up later on in Gen 3 anyway. It's probably more likely to just consider that a lot of the similarities serve the purpose of making the world feel more alive and real with a good sense of diversity, like these monsters sort of evolved from a common ancestor or something like that. Skyboxes. A skybox in video games is a box with the sky on it. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. No, but that is kind of what it is. It's essentially the area that encloses a level or map that has the sky and any distant structures textured on it and defines the sort of size of that level for the sake of objects and characters being able to travel high in the air or far onto the horizon. For most of Monster Hunter's history, it's been static images that may change slightly, with Wilds actually moving to be a procedurally generated cloud system that changes dynamically as time passes and the weather systems impact the world. That's a very core part of Wilds and the world they made there. This point in the Iceberg, though, I think refers to a bug in Monster Hunter World. I could only find a few posts on this, but apparently there used to be, or perhaps still is, a bug where the opening screen of Monster Hunter World that shows the company logos for the software being used appears in the skybox for some reason. So you would look up, and in the sky would be the Havoc and Speedtree and Umbra logos and all that. I can't imagine how this might happen. It might be fake. I could be making a fool of myself here, but it sure is funny if it's real. Nerscylla regional variants. Nerscylla is a spider-like monster that most recently appeared in Monster Hunter Wilds, taking up residence in the Ice Shard Cliffs and the Oil Well Basin throughout different seasons. It's also a monster that has come up far more often in this Iceberg project than I had ever expected it to. The Nerscylla we see in-game hunt Gypserus, skin them, and apply that skin to their body as a means of protection. We see a similar thing happen with its subspecies, the Shrouded Nerscylla, where instead of Gypserus skin, it utilizes Kezu skin for a similar purpose. Nerscylla rely on particular prey items depending on their environment, however those that can't find Gypserus or Kezu to hunt, or are unsuccessful in hunting them, remain in whatever environment they may find themselves in, cultivate with other Nerscylla, and rely on whatever other monsters may be present. As such, the skin that this monster wears is said to vary upon region based on the available prey, and whilst we don't witness this in-game, there's plenty of concept art out there of Nerscylla wearing things like Quechuacha hide, Genprey hide, and what looks like Lavassioth hide. There's a full thread on this by Unbanned Lagiacrus on Twitter with sources that I'll link below if you want to give it a read. Shrouded Nursilla World Tour. Now, it has been a while since I have actually versed a Shrouded Nursilla. I haven't played for you in ages and don't really have ease of access to footage of one at the moment. World Tour, in my experience, was a term referring to an old school Rathalos attack where he would fly around the entire area 2 full times before dive bombing you and landing awkwardly off the side of the map. The whole thing took like 30 seconds and usually missed. It was epic. As for Shrouded Nursilla, I don't recall an attack quite like that. I know that it could swing a whole lot, usually off nothing, but what I have to assume it's referring to is something I mentioned earlier. Apparently, whilst they are born in the dunes, they need to travel elsewhere to find Kezu to hunt. And so Shrouded Nursilla form small sails of web that they use to catch the wind and travel all the way to the sunken hollow, where they then survive until they can successfully hunt a Kezu and obtain its skin. Fun fact, real spiders can do this. It's called ballooning or kiting, and they release fine thread to fly around at the mercy of the air currents. So at any given time, you might just run into a spider flying through the air. How cool is that? Hunting Hound / Palamute. Monster Hunter has had several instances where new weapons have been added to the series. We started off with 6, 1 was added to the international release of the first game, raising it to 7, Dose added 4 more, bringing it to 11, another was added in Tri, and 2 more in 4, bringing the current recurring total to 14, with a few that have come and gone here and there. But did you know that there were 2 more that were originally planned to be added in the Generations games? One was a boomerang type weapon, of which you can sort of get a feel for when playing the Prowler in those games, but the second weapon was something called the Hunting Hound. Much like the name may suggest, the concept was a sort of range combat where your weapon was a dog. Yep, it was a dog. As far as I understand, a dog as a weapon never got very far past the concept phase originally, and the idea seemed to be that the hunter had some form of tool that would instruct the dog to use certain attacks, making it seem like a sort of mix between the bow and the insect glaive. Whilst this never saw the light of day in this form, you may notice that we did in fact get dogs in Monster Hunter Rise in the form of the canines. Now, whilst they themselves are not weapons but are instead companions, they do use tools and attack to a certain degree, so I think that it's safe to say that they are at least in part inspired by those original concepts, just realized in a different form. Frostfang Barioth is a deviant. Deviants are a category of monster variation from Generations and Generations Ultimate, which are denoted by being more powerful versions of existing monsters that have overcome some kind of great hardship, having been developed with the concept in mind of making monsters that are truly a great threat to the hunter. Variants, on the other hand, do in fact predate Deviants, but Generation 5, specifically Monster Hunter World, heavily leaned into them and brought them more into focus. As they were developed and became more common, their style of design made it so that they're basically the same as Deviants conceptually, though they aren't as thematic in my opinion, because the Deviants required special permits to hunt and had this sort of leveling system that allowed you to hunt harder and harder versions of each one, giving them a sort of progression system which I really liked. Given their similarities, there's probably a case to be made that these two distinct groups are basically the same thing. With regards to Frostfang Barioth though, I believe that the sentiment that this particular monster should be called a deviant rather than a variant comes down to its perceived traits demonstrating an aged and battle-hardened individual, but also specifically its naming convention. Variants have a tendency to have a single descriptive word that evokes the feeling and behavior of this enhanced form. Ruiner Nergigante, Raging Brachydios, Shrieking Legiana, Savage Devil Joe, Furious Rajang, and so on and so forth, whereas Deviants has some form of conjunctive word that's more of a title describing a physical trait. Hellblade Glavenus, Elderfrost Gammoth, Snow Baron Lagombi, Red Helm Azeros. You get the idea, and you'll notice that Frostfang Barioth matches the latter naming convention far more than the former. I would also argue the same can be said for Blackveil Valhazak, but let's move on. Frostfang Barioth is from Stories. Continuing on with Barioth as a topic, before Iceborne gave us the actual Frostfang Barioth, Stories gave us a Barioth named Frostfang. I have to assume that this is intentional, though it's probably just more likely to be a translation thing. Throughout the events of Stories and Stories 2, you come across another writer by the name of Avinia. Avinia is a recurring side character that has her own tragic backstory that sort of mirrors the player in the first game. Her monster of choice is a Barioth, whose name in English happens to be Frostfang. This Barioth has been with Avinia since both of them were little, as it helped protect her from a blighted gypseress which destroyed her village. And by the time you get to Stories 2, it's a fully grown Barioth. Frostfang is capable of surviving in hot environments such as volcanoes, despite being an ice element monster, thanks to the rite of channeling giving it that resistance, but apparently can utilize the dragon element as well, thanks to having genes of a Silver Rathalos in the anime. The Stories games are weird, man, but they're good. Go and play Stories. Jan Garuga was Elder Dragon level in Freedom. The Yarn-Garuga is a more widely known monster these days thanks to its appearance at the end of Iceborne, but it has in fact been in the series for a very long time, first appearing in Monster Hunter Freedom. Freedom was the first portable game in the series and was partly a port of Monster Hunter G and partly its own thing, having some content added and other content removed. One such addition though was the Garuga, which was added as the only brand new large monster and the final large monster added in the first generation. If you want to get really technical, the first Garuga we saw was actually a scarred Yarn-Garuga, but that detail isn't really relevant to this point here. Garuga back then was treated with a lot more gravitas, though it does throw hands with the Devil Joe in Iceborne, so it's still pretty tough. To say it was an Elder Dragon level threat may be overstating it a little bit, I think, but it was a dangerous monster that dished out a ton of damage despite showing up pretty early throughout the events of Freedom. The Elder Dragon comparison primarily comes from the fact that you could repel the Garuga, which is pretty unique for a monster that isn't an Elder, and it would even retain its damage for the next encounter, much like Elder Dragons do. The Black Blight and the Frenzy are connected. Monster Hunter is no stranger to weird phenomena altering the behavior of its monsters, and they are really no stranger to using some form of strange disease to explain and spread that phenomena. The most notable example of this is of course the Frenzy virus, something most folks are now familiar with due to Sunbreak and Wilds. Frenzy is downplayed in those games, but back in Gen 4, it was a big deal. Monsters would die and moments later explode back to life infected with the Frenzy virus, enshrouded in black-purple mist, and with a bad attitude. Frenzy monsters are in Wilds, but they're a little bit shit. Other examples of similar but unrelated things include the Hyperstate, Tempered Monsters, and the Affliction. Those who have played the stories games may find that the effects and visuals of the Frenzy virus sounds a lot like the Black Blight. The source of the Black Blight is kept vague on purpose, and whilst the Blight is shown to be spread by the Mekili Pietru, this monster doesn't seem to be the source of it itself, as it is the corrupted form of the Versa Pietru, so it can't really be what's causing it. I believe there's some things pointing to it being caused by the Fatalis, though this is an ability that it has never once shown to have in any other Monster Hunter media ever. All that is to say is that this point in the Iceberg is derived from the similarities in their effects and appearance, opening the door to the idea that the Black Blight and the Frenzy virus are one and the same, or otherwise very closely linked. In-universe mythology. Any functional world worth its salt will have some elements of history and culture to make the world feel more genuine, and with that culture comes myths and legends of times long past. Monster Hunter is no different, and whilst explicit lore mentions can be scarce, there are hints of in-universe mythology present throughout the series. The most obvious one is probably the Tale of the Five, which was a very prominent motif in World, as well as the stories we hear whispered about the Black Dragons, like the Guild trying to erase information about Alatreon from existence, and the almost godlike representation of Fatalis. You can find a lot of this information if you search for it. Usually things like armor descriptions will refer to gods and myths and other legends in the universe of Monster Hunter. Some examples of this include the Black Veil Valhazak armor referring to an entity called the Deathbringer. Kushala Daora's armor is said to resemble an ancient deity. The Bishaten set is mentioned that it is worn by those who dwell amongst the mountain gods, offering divine protection. Gammoth armor has several mentions of an unnamed god, even mentioning a warrior facing said god in battle. And of course, the Shigaru armor in Rise is said to belong to a priest who protects heaven. His hands guide the eternal cycle, his boots carry pilgrims to journey's end. Some of these descriptions go way crazier than they need to, but if they're to be taken as myths and legends in universe, they paint a great picture of the beliefs that the people of this world may hold. Sharash Valda and Safijiva are part of the Five. As I said in the previous point, the Tale of the Five is a creation myth within the world of Monster Hunter, and was the very first point on the first Iceberg tier of this series. Briefly, it is about the formation of the world by 5 dragons, and the development of the people who would be the first to live upon it. There's many elements to go into the story, but of particular note are the 5 dragons mentioned, as they each represent a part of the Island of the Five. 1 dragon represents the land, 1 for the mountains, 1 for the water, 1 for the forest, and 1 for the Sapphire Star. If these dragons are meant to be taken literally, and that they actually do exist in some form, some primary candidates as they're represented in Iceborne would be Sharash Valda and Safijiva. Clearly, if we're following this line of thinking, Safijiva would be the Sapphire Star dragon. All of its breath attacks revolve around utilizing brilliant blue bioenergy, and its ultimate attack is literally called the Sapphire of the Emperor. And then Sharash Valda is a little less explicit, but it would clearly be either the Earth Dragon or the Mountain Dragon due to its ability to manipulate very high frequency vibrations to the point that it causes seismic activity. You could go either way because Shara coats itself in rocks in its first phase and then completely reshapes the arena for its second phase, but its in-game description in Iceborne specifically says a mysterious elder dragon able to manipulate the earth itself. And so I'm going with the Earth Dragon for Shara. Roars of the Hoarfrost and Ancient Forest. The Ancient Forest and the Hoarfrost Reach are maps that you will frequently find yourself wandering through during the events of Monster Hunter World and Iceborne. Whilst you make your way through, or perhaps mid-hunt, there's a chance that you can hear a bizarre but very loud roar echoing through the treetops or the icy cliffs. These calls are an underutilized and rare mechanic that are in fact specific monsters calling out to each other for help, but it only occurs in monsters present in mating pairs. With that in mind, the only time it will happen in the Ancient Forest is when a Rathalos and a Rathian are both present, and likewise in the Hoarfrost Reach it only occurs when both a Legiana and a Shrieking Legiana are both present. This is a pretty cool mechanic really, and it's a shame it's so minor and rare of an occurrence. It would be cool to see it explored further in the future, especially now that multiple of the same monster can be found in one map as of Monster Hunter Wilds, and maybe we can actually, do something with the pack mechanic there, instead of it not really mattering at all. The Fatalis update wasn't planned. Well, we started this video with Fatalis, so it only seems fitting to end it with Fatalis as well. When Iceborne finally came to a close and the saga that was Monster Hunter World was done, the final update introduced a ground-up remake of the original Black Dragon, one of the most notorious monsters in Monster Hunter history. The brand new Fatalis fight was brutal, intense, cinematic, and all around felt really good to take the time to learn and improve at. Alongside its placement at the end of Iceborne is the idea that this update was not originally planned, that Fatalis was never meant to be the final update for Iceborne, but rather that it was set to end with Safi'jiiva and Alatreon. Some people like to phrase this as it being a last-minute decision, like it was pulled out of thin air, but that's not exactly the case. In the developer diary that announced Fatalis' return in Iceborne, the dev team discusses Monster Hunter's 15th anniversary, and the fact that they decided to include Fatalis in some of the marketing material. This was the first time it had ever been included in marketing for the series, and due to Fatalis' pretty old assets at the time, they redesigned and remodeled it for that purpose. And it turns out that fans of the series really like Fatalis, and so there was a lot of excitement around this, prompting Konami Fujioka to insist that it be included in the game. He was quoted as saying, "Okay, well, we can't not put it in the game now." Now, Monster Hunter's 15th anniversary celebration was in early 2019, Iceborne itself released on September 6, 2019, and Fatalis was added on October 1st, 2020, meaning that there was roughly a year and a half between the decision to include Fatalis and it being added to the game. So I wouldn't call it a last-minute decision by any means. That said, it's a very positive example of the impact that fans can have on game development and the excellent results that can come from devs listening to feedback. And that will just about do it for Tier 3 of the Ultimate Monster Hunter Iceberg. So far so good. Nothing too out of the ordinary, everything is pretty above board, but it only gets weirder from here on out. I hope you all enjoyed this video though. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and why not share it with a friend if you think they'll like it too. Until next time folks, take it easy, I'll see you later.